This is my endless presentation for the game prototyping module. Endless, the title of the game will hopefully fit. Endless is a 3D hack and slash game. It has one long wave-based level that the player must survive a horde of enemies until the very end or until they die. The player can get stronger, however, in order to have an easier time to get through the waves. The research in the guides I followed for this module were enemy AI guides and how to make a combat system, because I believe those two were two of the most important aspects when making a game design, or when making my type of game. Because without good combat, or a decent AI, there's not really any point. It would be very boring otherwise. My design schedule I made in the first week when I didn't fully understand just how much of it probably wasn't going to be possible. The player I've done. The player's done, I think. The enemies, and what I'm currently doing now are enemies, the mechanics are done. The map is half completed and the waves and animations are work in process. And the things I need to do are UI, weapons, or UI and weapons. Weapons actually are doing, so that should be over there. Sounds I would do later, and transformations are probably going to just get shelved because that's just too much. Don't even know how to handle that really. The current map I'm using, the one you see here, is a canyon that I found from a YouTube video of itch, which had a link to itch.io, which had a bunch of maps that I could insert in. Originally I planned for a Colosseum, but it became... I struggled to find one. So this to me still fits for the theme I was going for. Obviously I need to make it colored in, otherwise it just looks like a bunch of lumps. But when colored, well, hopefully it will fit what I'm going for, which is a barren wastelands of just constant fighting, an endless battlefield. My original Endless has come a long way from what it was supposed to be. It's now heavily slashed. The number of ways was originally infinite, but that obviously wasn't going to happen. And additionally, players would gain stats per kill, but that seems a bit too advanced for what I'm currently capable of. And I don't have any idea of how to even start doing that. Other things would be like transformations, as I mentioned, and it's going to be like shooting energy attacks and having like 20 different weapons. Now it would be like I would be lucky to have 5 weapons. If I'm being generous to myself, I'll be lucky to have 5. Some of the game mechanics for my game are next few slides. The obvious one here is the jump mechanic. The jump mechanic and the next mechanic are basically the get out of jail free cards for the player if they're getting swarmed, with the jump mechanic allowing the player to jump over the enemy's heads to sort of try and get away from them. The dash mechanic would go hand in hand with the jump mechanic, because if you jump and dash, you can go miles. The dash mechanic, as you can see, does have a cooldown, unlike the jump mechanic. The dash mechanic is also based off velocity, so the faster you are running, and if you jump, you go miles, but if you're walking, or if you just use it standing still, you won't go anywhere. The weapon mechanic is right now it's quite bare bones with only one weapon implemented for in the longsword. The weapons will be obtained upon beating a boss or a wave being cleared, with bosses being guaranteed to drop weapons. The camera will be locked into first person. This gives a sense of realism, in addition of fear of being overrun or flanked, because if you're first person you can't see everywhere around you, which will hopefully encourage the player to always be on the move and to make good use of the jump and dash mechanic so they can get a good idea of what's on the battlefield. And unless if you die, you lose everything, you get sent back to the start. Because it's a wave game, I didn't see the point for adding a safety net. But if depending on how feedback or playtesting goes, I would probably add a way for the player to keep certain aspects, such as maybe weapons that they had when they died, just so it's a bit more fair and encouraging for the player to replay. Boss fights will be waves where bosses will spawn in. They will be the main threat and the main thing that will probably be killing the player. And bosses are also how the player will gain weapons and other items, hopefully. Right now there's only 2 enemy types. I plan to add more of special unique mechanics, but right now there's only regular enemies, which the player can defeat easily, but could maybe get overwhelmed if there's enough of them. And bosses, which should on their own give the player a run for the money. Combined, they should make a lethal threat that should hopefully give the player a fun time, but also a rough time. Wave systems will include two main type of waves: boss waves and regular waves. Boss waves will have bosses in them, and depending on which boss wave it is, there will also be additional smaller of the regular enemies as well. Meanwhile, every other wave will be regular enemies, where only regular and standard enemies will spawn in, not bosses. When it came to animations, like for melee combat and moving around, I was able to get... I don't know how much this cost. This was free. Originally it was 50p, but that code made it free. I think I got it off a YouTube video. I can't remember which one though. This was also got off a YouTube video for melee combat. This one was on itch.io, so it's very easy just to get, no issues at all. This, even though it's melee combat, it's more so for weapons, and also has even death animations for them. The map assets I was also able to grab from YouTube as well. So, as you can see, there's the canyon one I mentioned. The other mountains there, the other maps there I might use. It depends on how I feel about them, but right now I'm not for it. Obviously, because of week 6 I wasn't in to do my presentation, I was able to add some stuff and focus on adding stuff to the game. The next... this and the next 5 weeks after this will be spent... well, sorry, this up to week 10 will be spent hopefully just adding all the final touches and cleaning up a lot of stuff. I need skins, need to make sure animations look like they actually do damage, I need to finish the map, hopefully add more enemies, more weapons, maybe abilities. That's probably not going to happen though. I need to do the UI, polishing the game of course, need to implement sound, and the final 2 weeks will require testing, with hopefully week 11 fixing most of it, and week 12 could fix out what I didn't do well at week 11. What I could have done better, scheduling is a big one. That's a problem I seem to have, is just scheduling stuff. I need to do more research in in-depth combat systems. I don't think I've done terribly, but it could always be way better, especially if it's the main concept of my game. And I need more realistic expectations. Transformations was never going to happen. Thank you for listening to my presentation.